song to get us started. Welcome, everyone. Really nice to see all of you here with us today in our ROI of Technical Content webinar. My name is Keren. I lead Zoomin's Value and Enablement team. And also with me today is Rita, our Director of Customer Enablement. And again, welcome. We have a packed agenda for you today. And some tips on how to make the most of this webinar. So first of all, throughout the session, we will have active discussions in our Q&A chat box with our value consultants waiting for your questions there. So feel free to raise any issues, questions, comments. We're happy to welcome them. Second, we will share with you a variety of resources throughout the webinar, white papers, research, insights that you can use. We will put them in the chat box as a link, but feel free to also make sure your phones and your barcode readers are ready, so you can also scan barcodes that will be on our slides. And last, this is a big webinar. We're happy to see everyone, but we are also very, very happy to meet each and every one of you in person. So feel free to use the link that we will now put in the chat box to book a meeting with us to discuss your value, see the content platform of Zoomin and how to use that to enhance content ROI or anything else you want to speak with us. We will also be joined a little later by Aditi Kashikar, who leads documentation for Automation Anywhere, and Aditi will share their use case on how they build their content ROI internally. So just before we dive into content and ROI, I'm sure everyone in our industry and in our community is thinking about how AI and GPT and large language models are going to impact how content is authored and delivered and especially consumed by our users. So we invite you to register for our next webinar coming up later in November on how to consolidate and secure knowledge for your AI applications. You can scan the barcode here, save your seat right now, or use the link that we are just putting in the chat box. And we're hoping to see all of you in this next very important and exciting webinar. So let's get to it. The first thing that I think is very important for us is, first of all, to align on content return on investment. There are quite a few definitions and ways that people think and measure ROI or documentation ROI. So we want to make sure that we're aligned on how we see it. And for us, it's a methodology. It's a very clear process under which we measure and then monetize the impact of documentation on your company's business goals. And two things I want to emphasize here. First of all, monetize. It's very important that we not just leave our value realization as outputs or deliverables, but also try and put a real dollar amount on the savings or the revenue generation that we as documentation leaders can bring into our company's business goals. So this is the definition that we follow. Now, why is this important and what is the opportunity ahead of us? So we are seeing more and more technical content being the first place that people go to when they're trying to make a decision what to buy in the B2B world. So you can see some of the data here. 90% of B2B customers reference technical content before they're making a purchase. So your content and technical content and product content is really a seller when your sellers are not in the room. Another indication of how important this is that looking at this pie chart, you see that 27%, the largest number of people actually research product online. That's how they spend their time before making a decision to purchase. So they go to your content and they go to the content that you provide to them more than they do anything else, like have peer-to-peer consultation or researching the product offline and so on and so forth. And this is a huge, huge potential for us to tap on. This potential is relevant throughout the user journey. So when your users are either, starting to understand they have a problem and they need to buy a solution to solve the problem, they start learning what solutions are out there. They evaluate you versus the competitors. They do this based on product answers, as we saw, more than any other source of information. Then they make the decision to buy and they become a paying customer. They still need your content to know how to implement your product, how to use it. Obviously, should they have any problems during their onboarding or later on, they want to get help, they need support. And obviously, you want them to use more of your products, expand and stay your customers with renewals. So for both of these key steps, whether it's new business or adoption and expansion, we will see throughout this webinar that content plays a critical role. So we spoke about our definition and the fact that a methodology is very important. And today we want to share with you our methodology of measuring content value realization. We're going to talk about the 4 steps framework that Zoomin developed, and we have implemented this with dozens of customers and companies throughout the globe. The first step is choosing the KPIs, choosing what is important for you to measure. The second is capturing the data for those KPIs. The third one is how do we quantify and monetize that? As we said, super critical to put that dollar amount. And then how do we showcase what we've done? How do we socialize the impact of content within our organization, internally and externally? So let's start with choosing our KPIs. Usually when we talk about content KPIs or what we can measure, when we talk about documentation, we are talking about 3 pillars of KPIs. The first one is what we call infrastructure KPIs. The second is efficiency and cost reduction KPIs. And the third one is revenue and growth KPIs. When we talk about infrastructure KPIs, the reason why we call them infrastructure, it's because basically this is the first layer of how your content is being consumed by your users. What do they do with this content? Who's looking at it? Traffic KPIs. What do your users search for, and what happens to them when they search for a specific content? Do they find it? Do they have the results they're looking for? Do they actually click on those results and get the product answers they're looking for? We have content KPIs, obviously, pages views, for example, their satisfaction with what they've just read. And we also have some web vitals KPIs, such as SEO scores, accessibility score, and so on and so forth. Second, efficiency and cost reduction. So this is where we're actually seeing how content, when it's properly consolidated and delivered in a unified way, can save a lot of money for different stakeholders in your company and also externally. So for example, IT and cloud costs, support, which are going to talk in quite depth about that. Cases that were resolved with documentation or cases that were deflected, never got even opened because people were able to self-serve with your content. And also internal teams that are using your content and are actually making their day-to-day much more efficient, whether it's publishing time, implementation time for implementation teams, sales team that are also using technical content, and even how to onboard your employees. And the last pillar is revenue and growth KPIs. So you can see quite a wide range of things that we can measure that really show that content is contributing to the bottom line of your company in different aspects, and also on the retention and as we said, like expansion and retaining of your customers, like NPS and CSAT and so on and so forth. So we covered those 3 pillars. You saw quite a wide list of KPIs, and this doesn't cover everything that you can actually measure. So how do we actually choose the right KPIs for our company? So first of all, not everything that you can count counts. So when you go through a content value realization process, you can't really measure everything. You need to focus, first of all, on what is important for your business. Is your business today focusing on cost reductions? Let's choose those KPIs that can contribute to that. Or are you focusing on growth? Let's choose the KPIs that can focus on that. So it's really important to understand the bigger picture and the strategic goals of the company and make sure that we tie our work into that. And of course, we also want to be realistic. Some of those KPIs may be, a low-hanging fruit, easy to measure. We have this data. Some of them will require additional work or bringing different stakeholders to the picture. We'll talk about that as well. But we want to make sure that it's realistic, that we know how to measure this, that it's something that we can do in the fairly short term, and maybe save the more complicated KPIs for version number 2. So we talked about choosing the KPIs. We saw some of the KPIs that were applicable. How do we get the data for those KPIs? So there are four main sources of data that we can use. The first one, for those who are customers of Zoomin, we have Zoomin Analytics. We'll show in a minute what's available out there. But Zoomin Analytics is not the only dashboard or analytics that is out there for you to measure content ROI. We also have industry benchmark. If we don't have the data that we need, and we're really eager to see how others are performing, meaning companies that are the same size of us, the same industry, we also have industry benchmark that we can use. We have internal documentation team KPIs. So for those of you who are, documentation teams, content writers, so on and so forth, I'm sure that you measure things all the time. Now we need to tap on what you're already measuring and see how we can monetize that. And again, we will offer you some ideas and suggestions on how to do that. And then we have stakeholders data. So we saw, for example, in the efficiency KPIs, some data other teams have. The IT team, the sales team, the support organization, which is critical to our work. And it's very interesting to see how throughout this process of realization, we're bringing those stakeholders into our conversation. So this is one example of infrastructure KPIs from our analytics. So you can see that we are using dashboards that cover both traffic and search and content behavior, completely, ability to filter and really see what your users are telling you day to day about what it is that they're looking for, what kind of results they're getting, what content is more popular than other content, and so on and so forth. This is a very, very easy way for you to capture very fast infrastructure KPIs. We also mentioned industry benchmark. So we don't want to leave you just with a title. A few months ago, Zoomin released our industry benchmark report. Basically, we looked at our entire sample of customer global database, which now contains over 16 million users. And from that database, we were able to extract the industry benchmark for infrastructure KPIs. You can scan the barcode, or if you want to just click on the link that is now in the chat box to download this report. And in this report, you're not only able to see the benchmark KPIs, but we are also offering you best practices and tips on how and what you can do to improve your results if you are behind the industry benchmark. So very useful report for you to see where you are in comparison to others, and also, again, how you can take immediate actions to improve on any KPI where you feel that, there's a gap to close. Last, efficiency and cost reduction. So we mentioned bringing, all the stakeholders into the conversation because some of them hold critical data for us. And I want to focus and put emphasis on bringing the support organization into the value conversation, because the correlation between documentation, self-service support is a critical one. I want to spend some time around how and what kind of definitions we need to align on with the support organization in order to capture case resolved and case deflection data. So let's start, first of all, with what it means, right? So we have two main ways where content or documentation can help reduce support costs. The first one is case resolution. Simply put, the process of resolving a ticket that was submitted with documentation. And we also have case deflection. So case deflection means that your users had a problem. They had an intent to open a support ticket for this problem to be resolved. But throughout this journey, they managed to actually get an answer from documentation. They were able to get an answer from content. And so the intent was never executed and they never submitted the ticket. And those cases never got to your support organization. Not only they saved the support organization money, but the experience of the users not having to go through support is also something very critical. Just as context, about 84% of users prefer to self-serve with content and documentation rather than go to support. So obviously, this is a win-win both internally and externally. Just like the benchmark report, we also have a very important resource for you that you can scan and download around case deflection and case resolution. In this white paper that we released, we dived into those definitions and how to capture data both on case resolution and case deflection. And we also gave a thorough explanation around how to decide what is the cost per ticket, which obviously is a key ingredient in building the ROI here. So as default, Zoomin recommends that a cost per ticket will be at $100. Again, you can find the exact formula and how we got to this recommendation in this report. But we've also seen companies, telling us that it can also go up to even as high as $700. So aligning with the support organization about that number is obviously critical for us to say, here's what we managed to save the support organization with documentation. Now, the road to case resolution, first of all, goes through what we call case classification. What do we mean by that? We as documentation leaders, content professionals, we cannot help maybe, solve tickets that are either bugs in the product or, some other product limitations, but we can definitely have an impact on cases that are tagged as how to or installation, how to install, how to configure, how to do this, how to do that. And you can see from this data that this impact is even higher, slightly higher than 50%. So imagine that your impact can actually help resolve or deflect nearly 50% of your support organization's submitted tickets. So again, just as a reminder, this is not just a cost reduction, this is pure customer happiness as well. So our N, so to speak, or our pall of for our value realization are these tickets. Now, diving a little bit deeper, let's say that we know how many tickets were tagged as how-tos. Those are tickets that we can influence. Now we need to work with support to actually break it down because not all tickets behave the same, right? So we have entry-level support, we have advanced support, we have tickets that are more complicated. And what we've done in this report, it also offered you a way to build a metrics to make it very granular and very accurate how you can help different types of support tickets be resolved. So you can see we're talking about average handling time for each of these different levels of support tickets. And we're talking about the average hourly salary of an agent that is working on those different levels. And from here, it's a fairly simple plug of numbers to get to the ROI. Again, assuming that we know exactly what is the scope of tickets, the number of tickets that were solved with documentation. And last, another way to look at it and to measure the ROI of support is by the method of communication. And I think this data coming from TSIAs is remarkable. So you can see that tickets that will result with documentation, a direct link or direct referral to documentation, the average cost of those tickets, the average cost to resolve those tickets is $4. Whereas other methods of communications, you see the gaps are enormous. So this is another way to measure support tickets. So we talked about data capturing, we saw analytics for infrastructure KPIs, we saw how we can work with support to build a case classification around the tickets that documentation can either resolve or deflect. And now let's talk a little bit about how to capture data from revenue and growth KPIs. So we're not going to go over all of them. Later in her presentation, Aditi will also share some of the KPIs here and how she spearheaded a value process that also captured some of this. But I want to talk a little bit about new business and actually leads coming from content and technical content and documentation. So if you recall, at the beginning of our webinar, we saw some numbers around the enormous traffic that goes into technical content. And we saw that 90% of buyers actually reference technical content before making a decision. So in our documentation portal, we made sure that we are there for those potential buyers that are seeking or learning or trying to even see if our solution is applicable to them. So with an easy click to request a demo from the documentation portal, you can actually tap on those leads and on this new business, and your marketing team can track that and see how many of these came from documentation portal. This is, by the way, in our documentation portal, and is a best practice that our customers are also using. We have that in each and every topic page that people are exploring. Again, we want to help our users make the decision because they're already visiting the technical content platform. Now, obviously, to tap on this traffic and to really capture this new business coming to your documentation portal, the path has to go through ungating the content, basically making it accessible to your users. Now, there are very considerations around whether to keep your content, gated or to make it public. And every company has different considerations. But as a best practice, and our recommendation is, again, when feasible, to ungate as much content as you can. There are different reasons why to do that. One of them is what we just discussed, capturing this new business potential. But in the report that we released around this issue of ungating content, we also compared some of the infrastructure KPIs between content that is gated and content that is public. And what you're seeing here is an example of how many cases are deflected when your content is public versus when your content is gated, and also pages viewed, for example, so content consumption. And we covered quite a few of those KPIs and compared them, as well as offer you some other considerations to look at when going into these conversations. Feel free to scan the barcode. You can download this report as well, or click on the link in the chat box. Very interesting read for those of you who are considering, making your content public or some of your content public. So we spoke about choosing your KPIs. We talked about how to capture some of the data for those KPIs. Let's move into the quantify and monetize, obviously a very, very critical step, and basically the essence of what we're trying to do with ROI. So first of all, where do we put all this data? And it's quite a significant amount of data once you really capture all those KPIs that you want to capture. So we use a very simple spreadsheet, nothing that no one can develop internally, and we're happy to help you build something like this as well. And this spreadsheet, as you can see, has 3 tabs for each of the KPI pillars. And it populates the data that you captured for all those KPIs in those tabs. And we have plugged in formulas that take the data and monetize that, again, for those KPIs that it's applicable for. So the formulas that are populated in the spreadsheet basically gives you an automated value realization process. And as you can see, it's very important that we track this throughout a very long period of time. So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, we do want to see with this value realization process, we also want to see improvements. So it's not just capturing the here and now, but we also want to make sure that we continue to follow up and monitor how those KPIs are behaving. There are, of course, other ways to capture the data. So just to show you a very simple tool that we use here with the companies we work with. We're talking about how to monetize KPIs, and I want to go through 3 examples of how we've done this with companies that we've worked with. So I want to show you examples of how we monetize case deflected, examples of how we monetize publishing time, and examples of how we monetized implementation time. So for publishing time, we are using industry benchmark to basically look at how long it took you to publish time before you made any changes or strategic decisions or consolidated your content. Then you took steps to do something to make it better, to consolidate your content, to improve search or to improve usability or findability, and so on and so forth. And our benchmark shows that usually when you take those actions to improve content writing, delivery, and consumption, you will reduce the time it takes to publish from 4 hours to half an hour. We also have companies that were able to reduce that to 10 minutes. And based on an average hourly salary of a technical writer of $30, multiplying that by the number of your publications, because it's 4 hours or half an hour per one publication, we can actually quantify how much time was saved in dollars. And last, I mentioned that we want to show you how we were able to work with Shiji to save costs for their implementation team. And it's a very, very interesting process that we've done with Shiji. Before we kicked off a value realization process, Shiji launched an internal survey around all of their employees, different teams, trying to learn how they're using technical content and documentation. To be honest, often you may not even know how impactful this is internally for team using your technical content. And we realized in this survey that the implementation teams are using technical content quite a bit. It was quite surprising to see, the extent of which they're using this. So we brought into the conversation their head of implementation, and we started to ask her some questions. How are you using technical content? And she basically told us, like, before we had access to really good technical content, we needed to write our own implementation guides. So our teams, the implementation teams, went to the field to work with our customers. We needed to write everything from scratch. That took us a lot of time, a lot of waste, and nothing was saved properly. And every implementation, we needed to do this again and again. After the documentation team started to do what they do, they no longer needed to do that. So they had full access to really good content, updated content, and that we saw saved them 70% in the time that they used to spend on writing. Now they can actually do their job, which is, great implementations. We needed to bring some additional, data to build the formula for them, like how many people are involved in each implementation, what is the average daily salary of those implementation teams. And because they're a global company, we took into consideration their implementations in the US and in Portugal and in other areas in the world. We really broke it down to exactly what's happening. And we were able to quantify this at almost $300,000 of savings just because those teams now had documentation. So imagine the impact that something like this can have internally. I'm sure that, you're all asking, okay, this sounds great. Where do I start? We looked at so many KPIs. We looked at different ways to capture the data, monetize that. We showed you some research and report, and there's a lot to digest here and think about. So the first thing that I would like to say is that we've done this with really dozens of companies from different industries with different KPIs, different requirements. Some of these companies wanted to, choose KPIs that we didn't even think about in our initial conversations. And together we were able to help them quantify that, capture that, quantify that, showcase that. So the first thing is for me to say is that you're not alone. This is why we are offering everyone on this call to really get your meeting with us. Our value consultants and our solution consultants will be very happy to understand where you are right now in this journey and how we can get you to something that you can really be proud of and showcase internally and externally. And I think one of the things that we've heard from almost anyone that have gone through this process is that they started with a feeling that the content people, the documentation leaders, are sometimes somewhat isolated from the business. The impact of what they're doing isn't shown, and there's such a gap between the potential of traffic of people that become customers because of the work that you're doing, and that isolation, it's very frustrating. And I think throughout this process, and throughout thinking about how we connect those two dots together, that feeling of isolation really went away. So there's a seat at the table, there's a real contribution, there's a real, need and interest from different leaders in the company to invest in technical content and to continue to invest in technical content and documentation, because we were able to show that this is actually, driving a lot of benefits for the company. So we encourage everyone to, take the first step or the second step or the third step, even if you are, already doing something like this and you just want our help, thinking about benchmark or thinking about how you can really quantify or monetize. We're here to help you with that. So we're really happy that you all joined us today. Again, feel free to book a meeting with us today, tomorrow. And before we wrap up, I do want to open it up for any additional questions or comments or feedback from the audience, myself or Aditi. All right. So hopefully feel free to, again, write to us if you have any questions as a follow-up. We will be sharing the recordings of this webinar with all the resources that we just showed you. So do not worry if you didn't have the time to either scan the barcode or click on any links. And thank you so much for joining us today. Aditi, thank you for joining us today. And looking forward to see everyone in our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.